Stay tuned to the end of this video for a word to our patrons. Hello everyone, welcome back to Let's Take FGO Wanted, the show where we let you know if you want to roll that 5-star. Hope everybody's ready for a chaste and proper Wanted today. It's going to be normal format stuff as usual. We're going to talk about history and folklore, fate, lore, that thing that we usually capitalize with an L, mechanics, and more. Yes, all of these have capitals in my notes. And then you're not going to see me until like New Year's. We're getting this out of the way early, and I don't think there'll be any new Wanteds until the New Year break. So won't that be fun? Though I'll be sure to bump on Zitter and Blue Sky, links to old Wanteds if you want to check them out. Reminders and stuff like that. Anyway, let's get into the business. Alrighty, we begin as usual with history, if you're not familiar with how these are formatted. So, kids, how up-to-date are you on your Elizabethan epic poetry? Well, honestly, you should probably be more familiar with this one, especially in these times, but I'll run it back for you. Britomart, the subject of today's Wanted video, in case you didn't pick that part up, comes from Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queene. I can't pronounce the extra E in there very easily. A 6-book collection of poetry, which consists of over 36,000 stanzas. So yes, it's big, and probably a little less digestible than Shakespeare in whole. But it's an individual book, so check that out. The first 3 volumes were published in 1590, and then they were republished with some edits when he published the next 3, so 4, 5, 6, in 1596. No, he did not George Lucas himself. Note also that in letters to Sir Walter Raleigh, who was one of Spenser's major sponsors, say that 5 times fast in the comments, he originally outlined this to be 24 books with an epic final battle and climax, but unfortunately died before he could finish production. So I guess The Faerie Queene is the Elizabethan Game of Thrones. And if George wants to get upset about that, he should finish writing a book. To give you a high-level summary, because these books are feffing long, The Faerie Queene is a series of stories centered around, well, more about. She appears on screen very little, but she is the title character. Gloriana, the Queen of Fairyland, who is definitely not an allegory for Elizabeth I. She rules the shiny golden city of Cleopolis, and has a squad of knights known as the Knights of Maidenhead. This is a very popular pun at this time, I think, who are usually all humans swapped with fairies. They're changelings. They embody, a number of virtues. 6, obviously, were, detailed in the books we've got, but apparently this guy wanted to go to, 24, so I'm not actually sure where he would have stopped counting virtues. Anyway, they go around fighting evildoers, monsters, saving maidens, liberating kingdoms, that kind of stuff. So you may never have read this one, but it's definitely done a lot of foundational work for fantasy and fairy story genres. Honestly, I think a lot of people probably don't realize how impactful this was on the scene of English literature, but I feel like just the idea of, solidifying magical good ruler of magical shiny city sends other people to go solve problems, and all of the guys are themed. There was a decent amount of questing in the Arthurian mythos, but those guys had much less obvious character archetypes. They were not actually color-coded. Spoilers. Anyway, in addition to all the fairy stuff, Spenser got in on the favorite British, and lots of other people, look at Fate, pastime of integrating the Arthurian mythos here as well, because it involves the Prince Arthur of the Round Table rattling around Fairyland, looking for the Faerie Queene, and so we get a few of our greatest hits there as well. So yeah, Arthur is a character who does stuff and is arguably on screen much more than Gloriana, but he's not the title character. So anyway, while this was clearly intended as a hype train for Queen Liz and a general ability to play in the phantasmal playground, Spenser did have some very clear allegorical ideas. He straight up said in an author's note that the work is supposed to fashion a gentleman or noble person in virtuous and gentle discipline. So it's, a little storied, a little straightforward, but the idea here is definitely virtues good, not virtues bad. Here's how you can, embody virtuousness. And a lot of that was background to talk about the fact that Britomart is known as the Knight of Chastity. She is introduced in Book 3, but also followed up directly in Book 4. And immediately, some of that background stuff I told you, she breaks them all a little because she's actually a British princess. Well, Wales, but, from Britain. She's journeyed to Fairyland, disguised as a male knight, after she saw another one of the big character knights, Artegall, in a magic mirror her dad got from Merlin, and has become lovesick. And she's accompanied by her nanny, Glauce, disguised as her squire. So yes, many funny classic moves here. Now, Britomart is introduced in the story as pretty Billy Badass. The text doesn't reveal her gender at first. It's the old Samus is a girl trick. And she manages to defeat Gurion, Knight of Temperance, who was the protagonist of Book 2. So, we do a lot of the sorting algorithm stuff there. And she does also duel Artigal to a draw while they're both in disguise. Neither realize it's the others. She is also probably a pretty good fit for Lancer. She owns a magical spear from her ancestor, King Vedidid, father of the mythical King Lear, which I guess was a popular subject, because this would be somewhere in the Elizabethan period when Shakespeare actually wrote King Lear, but I haven't checked the publication dates of every work of Shakespeare. Anyway, eventually in the story, Britomart does meet Artigal, but he's busy with another quest from Gloriana, so their whole story is extended again to allow for additional adventures, side quests, and shenanigans. Britomart does eventually marry Artigal, though, because she's got a prophecy that she's going to be the ancestor of future British kings. Artigal, Knight of Justice, also has his own backstory stuff as well. He's a prince from Cornwall. He was raised by Astraea. Yeah, that one. He has the arms of Achilles to defend him, and his squire is an Iron Man named Talus. We're having a lot of fun here. His story is completed in Book 5. So, like I said, Britomart gets a lot of supporting character length here. The name Britomart is one of the ones that Spencer listed wholly from the Greek. It's closely related to the name Britomartis, which is a nature goddess or nymph from the Cretan dialect. But the suggested etymology for name is basically just sweet maiden, so it could also be an epithet for some other goddess, such as Dictiana, goddess of Mount Dicte, where Zeus was born. Spencer's personal etymology, he suggests, is Brit as in the Britons, and Martis as in of Mars, letting you know that this chick means business. Though a sweet maiden or sweet virgin also works. We really like our double entendres here, okay? Britomart is a name which has endured in the Briton consciousness, though. There's been several HMS Britomart Royal Navy ships since the 1800s. Alas, the last ship to bear that name was a minesweeper that sunk in 1944, but there was a few. Archetype-wise, Spencer loves archetypes, Britomart fulfills a very similar role to Bradamante or Marfisa, Ruggeria's sister, a female warrior and queen of India, in the Innamoratio Furioso, duology. They're not even actually a duology, but I feel like you rarely can talk about one without the other. But they were released earlier in the same century, they're early 1500s, so Spencer would have been aware of them, and I think it's natural that we do kind of that, wrap back around in terms of themes, archetypes, and story content. And just to let you know how over-the-top Spencer was here, obviously it's very long, it's very in-depth, he had much bigger plans, but the whole work is done what is now known as the Spencerian stanza, so he invented a specific format, which he did the whole epic in. For those interested in poetry nerds, it's 8 lines of iambic pentameter, followed by 1 line in iambic hexameter, and the rhyme scheme is, sorry, there's going to be a lot of letters here, ABA, BB, C, B, C, C. So kind of like alternating elements back and forth. Now, this is the part of the show where I tell you that all of that was wrong. Except that it isn't actually. You should consider all of that correct, but also it's weird because it's about somebody else, because in FGO we're dealing with, the best way I will phrase it for the video is Britomart 2, as in the daughter of the original Britomart and Artigal. She is also a fairy knight, though considering how the poem The Faerie Queene works, we may actually now be at a much more on-point point with the Tam Lin translation, dealing with changeling knights and that sort of thing. But yeah, in the text, there's no strict basis for such a character, other than that we do know that Britomart will have some number of kids who will go on to be kings of Britain, and her FGO profile lists Aurelius Conanus. That's not really a big pull, but I guess whoever the scenario writer for Britomart was checked the Historia Regum and was like, yes, okay, so we've got Arthur, and then Vortigern, and another guy, and then another guy. I guess this Aurelius Conanus is nobody. Yeah, it's not a great pull, but anyway. So, the supposition here is that Britomart, after marrying Artigal, as per the prophecy, in the big, shiny, unfinished climax of the Faerie Queene, Gloriana invites both of them back to Fairyland, which effectively makes them fairies. They are living there permanently. And thus, Britomart II here has the Fae trait, has the non-hominid, or lacks the hominid trait. It's a little weird how that works sometimes. And she is kind of sort of a fairy. Second generation immigrant to Fairyland, if you will. Let me know when those borders open up, brother. Let me get out of here. The functional difference is basically not much. Britomart II is described as looking and behaving just like her mother when she was that age, even though she is a fairy. But she decided to roll out because everybody's favorite meddling dream guy, Merlin, told her a lot about King Arthur, who, again, if we're assuming a kind of all myths are true approach, must have hung out with the original Britomart, because Prince Arthur's in the story. I guess that would technically be during the Saber Lily phase, maybe? As a further addendum, by the way, in the story, Prince Arthur has the hots for the Fairy Queen Gloriana, so you can put that shit on Saber however you like as well. Anyway, Britomart 2 listens to Merlin's stories too much and decides to seek out Chaldea. Both her NPs are drawn from the story. She's got the Spear of King Blaidd, or Blaidd? The Blaidd is pretty close, which, by the way, is almost assuredly what the wolf guy in Elden Ring's name is drawn from. Anyway, it's a magical spear that can push anybody off their mount, and she has the armor from a Saxon queen named Angela, who was an enemy of Uther Pendragon. It's what was worn by the original Britomart in the story, though, of course, we animate it up as, like, giant, scary power armor. In the story, it's described as, first of all, being much more, like, flattering to wear. It's for a queen, so it's, like, smaller and explicitly gilded. But Britomart is able to be under disguise, so, like, you know, they got into some interesting places with it. There's a few notes about this backstory I could editorialize on, but I think we'll save that for the podcast once we actually get to see some story. Obviously, you're going to see Britomart have some story stuff in the upcoming Tamlin Cup, so look forward to seeing her there. And who knows, maybe she'll show up later. But that means it's time to transition to the mechanics slide. So, entering mechanics, Britomart is an SSR Lancer. She's got an attack HP spread, which still favors HP, but it's not the highest in that department. She's very median. Her attack isn't the highest, but it does lean a little there. She's got good HP, but it's also not the highest, so kind of median. She is QQA BB, fairly average hits, so high NP gain. 3 hits on that arts and only 4 on the quick, so she's like 0.7 something. It's been a day or two since I wrote the script. And, you'll immediately figure out her niche, because I'm going to explain to you that her NP is very funny. They took a concept that, honestly, I think several of our other characters in this genre have, and they really went out there. So, it's an AoE quick, 6 hits. It gives her Pierce Invul for 1 turn first, and it also gives her a 50% damage up buff versus enemies with the riding skill, and its overcharge effect is bonus damage to riders. So riding is a pretty diverse trait. We haven't really seen any anti-action on it since, I think, the OG Nobu. But the idea of an anti-rider Lancer is just so funny to me because, like, on the one hand, yes, that's how if you're doing, like, tactical rock, paper, scissors, yes, spear beats horse. But, like, also, nah, you don't need an AoE assassin. We made a Lancer for that. This is a commentary based on my personal experience with AoE assassins. Single-target assassins are very good, but clearing waves of riders has always been problematic in this game. So yeah, they made a Lancer that does that. We'll talk more about how to maximize that in a second. Skills, her first skill, a 2 hits 3 turns invul, a 20 to 30% NP gen for 3 turns, and a 20 to 30% crit resistance for 3. Solid defensive package. Second skill generates 5 to 10 stars instantly and 5 to 10 stars per tier for 3 turns. It also comes with complete debuff immunity for 3, and 20 to 30% crit damage for 3 turns. So not a big buff, but a lot of little thorough things. Third skill is the expected one. It's very straightforward. It's Buster and Quick card up for 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and a 20 to 30% battery. Her only passive is Magic Resistance B+, so her natural debuff resistance is also fairly solid. Britomart's another one of those characters. I know I feel like I'm saying that a lot this year, but she feels like she could have existed anywhere in the past several years. I feel like her niche is super obvious. She has a piercing NP, which is good. I'm trying to remember. I think there are several Lancers which do pierce, but I do not remember if there's a Lancer that gets... Actually, yeah, no, there is. There always has been for a while. Doesn't Lancer Artoria automatically pierce on NP? I have one. You can tell I hardly ever use her because I have a very well-grailed Ereshkigal. But yeah, so piercing Lancers have existed for a while, but this is like a niche that we're like renewing. Lancer Artoria is a story-locked 5-star, so she can be hard to get, but also she has like basically double-dipped bonus damage. She does the 50% extra to riding enemies and gets basically at level 1 overcharge. I think the way the damage formula works is it's like basically like an extra NP multiplier, because it's not like she does 200% extra damage to the end. It's the total damage amp of the NP is like increased. But so it's not exactly class advantage, but when it comes to enemies who are both riding and rider, which is most riders, she'll have some extra yip. And there are a couple of archers who have riding, and there's a decent number of extras, and I think even a few berserkers and stuff that also have riding, so you can get that 50%. You can do, 1.5. Her buffs are mostly selfish but solid. She has good defenses. 3 turns of debuff immunity is nothing to sniff at. She has a 2-hits invul. 30% crit resistance is the kind of thing that's going to kick in a couple of times. So, you got a few oddballs there. And as 90++ nodes trend back towards multiple classes, I have no doubt that there's going to be some edge cases where she's going to be best in slot in future. And also, I'm pretty sure if I remember looking at some of the quests actually in the Tamlin Cup, there's got to be at least one where she's intended to be functional. At the very least, they're going to have multiple enemies with riding in there, so you can get that extra oomph. Mobs don't have the riding trait a lot, so it's mostly for servants. Now, team comp, gonna be sadly kind of straightforward. She's quick and she's buster. She has an AoE quick NP. You will probably be double or tripling up on Scotty to speed up farming. You can maybe sprinkle in a Sakaba Hime in there, or if you're on a budget, you can try Alexander or Zhang Ju as kind of like your generic AoE quick support. You could use the Atalantes as well for this, but I feel like that's not as good a fit. Maybe Atalante Alter, because she's, single target berserker. So you could mix and match some stuff. Speaking of single targets, if you're doing like multi-core stuff or fighting bosses, I would also still recommend normal Skahak. She's a powerful boss killer, and she can also give you some very juicy supports for your AoE quick sweepers. So there's a few different combinations you can try, but most of the time you're going to be looking for just a Lancer who can clear easily, and, well, she is quick AoE. She has a battery. She does stuff. You can make it work out. Now, I will say, CE selection is going to be a little tricksy as a result. The Scotty system means that you can basically go forward with 0 charge. She does have a battery and an NP guff? I'm blurring together gain and buff there. She can increase her NP gain with a buff for a little bit to speed you along your way to refund, but it's a 30% battery, so that can make the selection a little weird unless you go in on her app end skills, which you can do. Keep that in mind. That can become 50% very easily, so those are all options. But in general, I would say just probably you want to make sure NP's hitting as hard as you can, so stuff like Heaven's Feel and Black Grail and their counterparts are probably good ideas, but a quick buff also couldn't hurt. There are a wide variety of quick boosting CEs that can just make her overall damage level in there. If you really want to make her slap for, like, hunting specific bosses, her Bond CE might actually be good in this case. That's another 20% anti-writing damage for the whole team. But also, future alert, clairvoyance powers. Keep your eyes peeled for a Britomart-themed CE next year in the Ilia's Castle event. It is a gift CE, so I believe you can obtain all of them fairly easily. But it's basically Britomart's Honey Lake scenario, which, if you don't know, Honey Lake is a CE that's really good for Yang Guifei specifically. But the Britomart CE from Ilia's Castle is a 50% starting battery and gives her 30%, or gives anybody equipping it, 30% extra damage versus the writing trait when max limit broken. So that should be something that, depending on your team comp, can be very functional to juice up and make sure that trait damage you're doing is maximized. Otherwise, like I said, focus on NP damage and quick up. And then for the rest, it's pretty simple. So, for a Faerie Knight, a Tamlin, Britomart has some pretty reserved mats. She needs a few Night Metals, soaps, and some bicorn horns to ascend. Skills feature more of the SEM, though do keep in mind she needs 24 little scale bottles per skill, so that might be a little bit of an issue, since that tabulates up, but all in all, much more relaxed. Banners-wise, Britomart is a little sparse. She's going to have a rate up now, and in about a year, she's going to get a secondary banner at Nemo Christmas, but using my occult powers of clairvoyance, I predict we're going to see another banner for her in JP soon, before the year is out, just because they've been doing that all year this year, so either, like, as a follow-up to the event they're doing now in November, or at the Christmas event, well, not for sure Christmas event, but they're doing an event in December. Some of those, I think they've said, may require LB6 clearance as well. So, she's gonna get another banner, don't worry. And she is limited, so expect her to be packed into future Lucky Bag and Destiny Order summons somewhere as well. And don't have a lot of the other stuff to talk about. That's gonna be it. Virtuous day, my friends. May your quests find you well, and when in doubt, remember, it's all Merlin's fault. Good luck on those lottos. But yeah, that is going to wrap us up. If you want to hear more in-depth talk about the event, the lotto, our own reactions to it, check out our podcast, Let's Talk FGO. There should be a event guide, what we call a pregame, in last week's episode, and we'll have, probably first impressions and results in upcoming this week's show. It should be on the YouTube channel every Saturday. We got a podcast feed. Check it out. And then I'll just get it out of your hair. Give us a like, click subscribe, leave your comments. Love your comments. You can also hit us up on Discord. You can join our channel memberships for access to membership badges and emotes, and support us on Patreon to get the episode early. I'll have words for some more patrons in a second, but now I have to do the outro bit. And shout out to our patrons like Adam Harp, like Snow G, Call Me Zed, Carlos, Dragon, JDM9000, Just the Fae, Kaiser, Chris Starlight, Legendary Boss Hunter, Liam Kessler, Rise of Kenji, Rogue Robin, Charvor, some guy named Bob, Varian the Crow, and all the rest you see here. Thanks so much for your support, guys.